In this episode, I speak with Megan, the Biomedical Naturopath. Megan is passionate about working with women's health as well as interpreting pathology testing. In this episode, we're particularly diving into the topic of histamine, the histamine-anxiety hormone and gut connection. I know it's a bit of a mouthful, but that is literally how much is connected to histamine. Histamine is something I haven't spoken before on the podcast, but it definitely can play a role with anxiety. Just keeping in mind that there are many potential underlying causes behind the anxiety you're experiencing, and this is just one of them. In this episode, we'll be talking about what histamine actually is, how common is it, what are the symptoms, what are the next steps if you feel like you might have a problem with histamine, and then what you can do about it. Megan has a wealth of knowledge on this topic, and it was so much fun discussing it with her. Okay, let's go to the show. Welcome, Megan. I'm so excited to have you here on the show, the Biomedical Naturopath. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Georgie. I'm super excited to chat today.
Well, one of the things I wanted to invite you on here to discuss, Megan, is something I can't believe in 173 episodes. This is 173.
Yes.
That we haven't talked about histamine.
It is such an important topic, particularly, obviously, as you know, surrounding that mental health side of things, and definitely feeds into so many other symptoms that might be happening for people. But yes, absolutely, that mental health picture can be really the thing for people that, if they work on reducing their histamine, can absolutely bring a huge amount of relief for them.
Exactly. And it's not just like the histamine anxiety connection. It's really like we could hyphenate that out longer to the histamine anxiety hormone gut connection.
Absolutely.
So we'll dive into that. We'll explain it for people. But first, before we do, I want to know, I like to set the scene because I'm a people person. I want people to know a bit of the context in your story. And to be honest, Megan, I don't know your story. So I'm kind of curious to find out, like, how did you always see yourself getting into this work and helping women with their hormones in the way that you do with your expertise in testing in particular? Or was it something else? Like, did this just kind of like end up being where you've ended up?
That's a great question, actually. It's a bit of a journey. So I would you believe it? I started doing an accounting degree when I was 21 and absolutely hated it. And I was just not that way inclined. My brain did not work that way at all. And then my dad's a chiro. And so I've always had an interest in alternative medicine and more of natural side of things. So I have always been in that kind of natural health space. But then my dad invited me to work as a medical receptionist. And I wasn't even studying at the time. I was floating back then. And I started working for him, and he actually owned a holistic practice at the time and had integrative GPs there. And that kind of sparked my initial interest. And then I went on to become a medical receptionist for two really big holistic companies here on the Gold Coast that have a lot of integrative GPs. And that is kind of what really sparked my initial interest in it. And then that's sort of kind of what has led me down this path. So I initially did my biomedical science degree, and I initially set out to become an integrative GP. That's what I really wanted to do. I really enjoyed seeing what those integrative GPs were doing, but I was then had discussions with the integrative GPs at the time that they had felt very restricted in the types of prescribing that they could do. And so I then decided to become a naturopath so I could have a little bit more free reign in terms of, not being so over-regulated by the governing bodies here in Australia. And so I decided to go down that pathway of becoming a naturopath. And then within my own naturopathic degree, so I did my biomedical science degree, and then I've done my nat degree on top of that through Southern Cross Uni. And that my nat degree was where my pathology interpretation interest sort of initially peaked. I had a lecturer who was really into it and really sort of shone a light on the information that can be drawn from bloods and just general everyday bloods, and that kind of really sparked my interest, and I really enjoyed looking at that. And then basically from then I have spent probably thousands and thousands of hours, devouring people's bloods, particularly as you do as a student. I would look at one set of bloods and I would go through every single possible scenario that could possibly mean for that person, and then try and connect all of the dots. And, obviously I don't do that now, but I can look at bloods now and understand all the types of, differences that kind of what things can, be drawn from blood test. And then how I sort of got into this space, I just enjoyed women's hormones. I've been on the pill myself and just had so many different symptoms happen after being on the pill that I never really attributed to being on the pill. And particularly my mental health went completely downhill after I went on the pill. I'd never experienced anxiety in my life. And after being on the pill, I had debilitating anxiety where my mum would have to sleep in bed with me because I was so anxious that something was wrong with me. And then I suppose I've sort of just come into the space of women's health and hormones because of my experience being on the pill and all the things that happened to me being on the pill. And so I do have a really keen interest in mental health as well because of my experience. I do have issues related to histamine. That's why I enjoy it so much, because I know I have issues associated with that, and that kind of springs up my own mental health sort of stuff. And then I said, I suppose the hormones things has just been a natural progression, I think, because I've enjoyed being in that space just through my own experience of being in a woman and just seeing the lack of quality care for women and gaslighting and, real lack of understanding around blood testing and, what might be happening for women. I've just really enjoyed being out and in that space and enjoying supporting women and, being that advocate for them when many others aren't.
Oh my gosh, that's incredible. You just summed that up so beautifully and really gave that context. And you know what's funny? I was just thinking as you started saying like you were studying accounting, I'm like, well, it's kind of come full circle for you, Megan, because you're still playing with numbers, but you just needed a context that felt exciting and probably purpose driven.
Yes, absolutely. And my husband has to pry me away from work. I could honestly look at blood test results all day and feel super satisfied and really happy going to bed at night. And I love looking at blood test results and pulling together that spider web of information. And, there are so many aha moments that you go, particularly for clients where I'm like, this is it. Like, this is why you feel like rubbish. This is why you have irregular periods. This is why you have anxiety. This is why you have these things. And it's really, it gives you that concrete answer as well, not just like, those other types of kind of diagnostic tools that can sometimes be used. There is like, it's black and white on the blood test, it's either there or it's not there sort of thing.
Yeah. And it's really, and so you can't kind of like question that evidence. It's like, and the mind loves a bit of evidence to feel reassured.
Definitely.
I do love, how much we can offer people in terms of investigating your physical health, your physical well-being. What are your hormones doing? What's your gut doing? And how is this playing into anxiety? Because I feel like, particularly given that those of us more prone to anxiety like control, it does give us a sense of control. I can actually change that number.
Absolutely. Yeah. And as you said, you hit the nail on the head, right? Most people with anxiety, myself included, like that control. And so it's also it's reassuring to see it and be like, okay, I can do something about it. Here it is on the paper. And this is like a definitive thing rather than, sometimes those things, other diagnostic tools can be a bit airy-fairy.
Exactly. And then working through like your childhood trauma, you can't measure that. That's an ongoing thing.
Totally. That is not, as I say to all of my clients, I can work on the biochemical side of things. And of course we can talk through, kind of that trauma-based sort of stuff, but that's where those sort of specialities come out, the psychologists, the social, whatever, all of those, they're people that you can chat to and work through that. But if you can have your biochemistry working for you rather than against you, it helps those therapies work so much better.
Totally. I see it like strengthening us. It's giving us a nice solid foundation so that all of those other things can work so much better. Even a meditation practice works better when you are, say, feeding yourself correctly, nourishing your body in the right way, stabilizing your blood sugar. Anyway, yes. So excited. We're just like both just like agreeing.
I know.
Love it.
We're already going on our tangents already.
Exactly. We knew this would happen. Yes. But let's go back to our chosen designated topic.
Yes.
What is histamine? How would you describe it to people?
So histamine, as we traditionally know it, and so what people are most familiar with histamine is a, allergy, we relate it to allergies, but histamine is actually a neurotransmitter. And so histamine, as we know it, is a very excitatory neurotransmitter. So, and what I mean by excitatory is it's very stimulating to the brain. And so it can act and feel like, I often describe it, it feels like an accelerator on the brain a lot of the time, and that overthinking and constant thoughts streaming through. And it also reduces GABA production as well. And so GABA is a calming neurotransmitter, and it helps to relax and soothe the brain. And so that histamine in itself acts very kind of overstimulating on the brain, but it also then reduces GABA production. So you kind of get this double whammy of kind of overstimulation because of A, histamine being an overstimulating neurotransmitter, but then B, the GABA is then not able to come in as well.
Yeah. And how common is a problem with histamine in terms of how much, like, people you see, people you work with? Is it something that you see in like a lot of patients? Is it kind of on the rarer side?
I would say it's more common than people realize, particularly if you have an underlying gut condition, or if you have a hormonal imbalance, or you're on oral contraceptive pills. So there can be different variations of, issues with histamine, but there are certainly things that can worsen that histamine intolerance, that being oral contraceptive pills, because estrogen releases mast cells release histamine, and then that whole cycle then just feeds into itself. Yes. And then SIBO, which stands for small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, that reduces the enzyme that we know to clear histamine, that being DAO, and that it also impacts on vitamin B6 absorption and uptake, and we need B6 to make a DAO enzyme as well. So those things can certainly feed into your histamine, and I do see it. Look, I see a disproportionate amount of women, but I would say probably 70 to 80% of my clientele have issues with histamine.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you think about, like, how common is it that we see high levels of estrogen in women, and how common is it that, I mean, if 80% of IBS diagnoses are actually SIBO,
yeah.
Which, we're just dropping some facts here for everyone listening, yes. Then yeah, I totally see that it's more common than people might think. I'm mindful of those listening who might be prone to some more health anxiety, latching on to this though and going, oh my God, this must be me. It explains everything. But just like understanding that all of us to some degree have a bit of leaky gut, it's just in different severities to others. Do you see histamine as the same way, in the sense that we can have more of a severity of it, of impact of it, or it's something that it's either there or it's not? Do we see it like a diagnosis, like you've got high histamine?
Yeah, look, it can sometimes be clear cut, like you have high histamine. You can do a test. It's called whole blood histamine test. That test range you're looking for is between 0.4 to 0.5. Just ignore the reference range, because I know what the reference range is. It goes up to 2. Anything above 1, though, is really what I'm looking for. I have found just clinically, anything less than 1, I haven't found to be clinically as significant for people who I've then gone on to treat with histamine things, and that hasn't really sort of seen those therapeutic effects for them or any change in their kind of clinical picture. But there is a sliding scale, because, as you know, histamine is a bucket, right? So it's not that you can never have any histamine sort of issues, but if you continue to fill up your bucket with like histamine relating foods, right? And then you might keep your bucket like half full for the entire week, with some apples and bananas, not apples, bananas, so avocados, bananas, papaya, kiwi fruit, shellfish, those sorts of things that are high histamine foods. And then on the weekend, then you go have cheese and wine and chocolate. And then you just, like, histamine bucket goes, oh, well, I've just completely overflowed. And then you get the symptoms related to that histamine as well. So it can certainly be a sliding scale because of that bucket sort of scenario. But then there can also be that very clear cut in the blood, where I just look at the blood and I go, look, you've got high histamine. You can see it in your blood work too.
And you've always got that test. Oh my God. Okay. So many questions coming in. I know those listening are going to go, what? But avocados are healthy. Bananas healthy. We'll get to that in a minute. Firstly, we just got to make this clear for people listening. What are those symptoms to look out for of a histamine issue? We're going to assume everyone here has got some anxiety going on, so that one can be ticked. But of course, you can have anxiety for a multitude of reasons, not just histamine. So where are we going to start thinking histamine testing might be required?
So with histamine, the things that I would start looking out for are headaches around ovulation. Do you have migraines? That can often be a histamine symptom. Do you have postnasal drips? Do you have sinus congestion? Do you get a prickly tongue when you have things like shellfish? Pineapple is often a big one that people will notice, and they just naturally avoid these foods. They think they have an allergy to the foods, but they don't really know why. And so it's often that histamine response that they're having. Avocados and bananas to a lesser extent for people, but certainly I have seen them trigger in some people. But usually the big ticket ones are typically, or people who wake up the next day after having wine and they have like that congested nose and like they get the heart racing and the flutters and things like that. That can often be a sign of a histamine intolerance. Low blood pressure can, hives, that derma, when you scratch yourself and you get redness after you scratch yourself, that can be a sign of histamine intolerance as well.
Does it need to feel itchy too, Megan?
Not necessarily. You can have itchy skin. People do report itchy skin, but not necessarily.
Could it be that people might notice some like puffiness and that kind of thing as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Particularly if they have more of that allergy response to the histamine, without a doubt. Yeah, for sure.
Okay. And postnasal drip was another one you mentioned.
Yeah, postnasal drip, just sinus congestion. A lot of people will report sinus congestion. A lot of people that I see who do, particularly if they've seen the ENT specialist and there's no actual structural issue for the reason that they're experiencing that postnasal drip, oftentimes it can be an issue with histamine or just constantly blocked sinuses, those sorts of things that can sometimes indicate that that histamine is overproducing.
So you might sit down with someone, start to gather these symptoms, start to think, okay, this is looking a bit like histamine, based on those sort of things, like you, particularly those headaches and migraines around ovulation. Is it histamine when it's headaches and migraines around like the PMS time before our period?
It's less so. So it can still be, but typically the ones that you see that are histamine related is because of the estrogen peak that happens at ovulation. So when you get that estrogen peak, because of the way estrogen feeds into your mast cells and then histamine production, you get this kind of it just feeds into each other. Histamine produces, the estrogen makes a mast cell, and then the mast cell stimulates the histamine release, and then more histamine, more estrogen, and so it feeds into each other. So typically it does happen around ovulation. Headaches and migraines leading into the bleed, particularly if they're kind of that 3 to 4 days before the bleed, is typically due to estrogen withdrawal, which disrupts our glutamate production. And the glutamate moves like a wave, like through your brain, and it's a very stimulating and pain promoting and inflammatory neurotransmitter. And that's usually the cause of the migraines leading into the bleed rather than being a histamine thing.
And what about women who might be postmenopausal, who are no longer having those fluctuations in estrogen? Could they still have a histamine issue that's not related necessarily to that estrogen?
Absolutely, because we know that there are different things that cause that histamine. And really for histamine, it's thinking about it like histamine in versus histamine out. Where are you getting that histamine in? So there can be gut bugs that manufacture their own histamine. So we know that. Being progesterone deficient as well is enough as well to a trigger of histamine too. Being an undermethylator, so that is a specific genetic condition as well, whereby you don't make enough of what we call methyl groups. And so you get an increase in blood histamine because you can't break it down due to lack of methylation. And then how are you getting your histamine out? Do you have SIBO? And certainly postmenopausal women can have SIBO. And so you're not able to then make that DAO enzyme to help clear the histamine. And then you're obviously not making enough B6 as well to help make that DAO enzyme as well.
Does gender play into this? Are women more likely to have a histamine issue than men? I suppose this might be just a no-brainer given the estrogen connection, but what's your perspective on that?
Look, I don't know the research on that, to be honest. And because I see a disproportionate amount of women, it would be hard for me to make a comment on it. Yeah. But I would say, and just coming back to that comment you originally said on estrogen, I mean, men don't typically make a lot of estrogen. If they had SIBO, then for sure. And look, I do see a small amount of men. It's typically the husbands of the wives that I see. And look, I certainly do test them, for methylation sort of based issues, particularly if they're coming to me for mental health sort of stuff. But I would say it's hard to comment. I don't know, but I would say probably more women based because of the hormone connection there.
I asked that question because more and more I'm becoming aware that there's a growing community of men listening to the podcast. And I'm just like, hey men, I see you, just wanted you to know.
Yeah, sorry, I don't
Welcome.
have any research on that. I apologize.
That is all good. But yes, there's definitely that SIBO connection. And hey, we all have guts. So potentially some SIBO connecting there too. Okay, so let's say someone's not in their head here and they're thinking, oh, I might have some of those things. Or perhaps it's they're thinking about a friend or a family member. What's the next step? You mentioned testing. Is this something, do we just walk into our GP's office and say, hey, I think I need to test my histamine?
Probably not.
What's that conversation going to go down like?
Yeah, I know, right? I would say I now just myself request it. I have found out of all of the blood testing that I do, I have found that most doctors don't even know what the test is, and they don't know how to give clients the right information to get the test done correctly, because it has to be done in a very specific way. It needs to be done, it needs to be drawn a particular way, and then it needs to be stored in a particular way. So I give them all that information just to make sure the test is done correctly. Your naturopath can absolutely request that test. You can ask your doctor. I've had probably 10% to 5 to 10% of doctors actually know the test and go on to do the test. So it's always worthwhile doing it, because being a naturopath, I can't bulk bill. And so it's an out-of-pocket expense. So if you can get your GP to do it, happy days.
And you mentioned doing the test correctly, that it can obviously be easy to get it wrong.
Yes, absolutely. So that's why it's important. You need to actually pre-book the appointment in, ring the pathology, let them know I'm coming in for this particular test. Don't take an antihistamine before it, because that will reduce your whole blood histamine. So it can give you a false negative as well. So being mindful of that is really important too.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Megan. And so where does this whole histamine issue fit in with MCAS, mast cell activation syndrome, that gets spoken about? Yeah.
Mast cell, okay. Mast cell activation. That is probably a big topic, I would say, because they now believe that mast cell activation is maybe one of the primary causes of chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia. That's kind of where they're thinking with mast cell activation. And they think it is usually triggered off by some sort of like virus or something that has kind of, or SIBO can certainly worsen it as well. But they think there is also a genetic link in there too. I don't fully understand it, but yes, there is, kind of that sort of mast cell activation as well.
And are these two separate things, basically?
Two separate things. Yeah, they're not the same thing. You can certainly have issues with histamine without a doubt, but having that mast cell activation switch turn on, there's usually something that has switched that on permanently, and that then disrupts mast cell production, and then goes on this kind of, you have a lot more different types of symptoms. People can get gastritis, numbness and tingling in their feet, just like very different types of symptoms that I would say are probably less of that kind of high histamine, strictly anxiety, hormonal, gut related, and more coming into your chronic fatigue kind of picture, and the symptoms that can often go along with that as well. Body aches, muscle pain, very odd symptoms.
So perhaps we can think of it like, look, if you've got high histamine, you're probably functioning pretty fine in your life, but things are out of balance and could be more in balance for you to feel optimally well. Whereas maybe with more of the MCAS, it's you're definitely an unwell person needing support, and you've probably gone through some testing and some work with professionals and health professionals to discover that and uncover that for yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's usually some sort of trigger, like viruses, mold can do it, heavy metals can do it, but there's usually something else. Usually people have been sick, as you said, for quite a long period of time, and nothing really seems to fit together.
Yeah. Okay. Now, is there any point just assuming one has a high histamine level versus getting and skipping the testing, considering there can be some hurdles to getting that testing done? I'm asking a biased person.
No.
Who loves testing.
I love testing. I would say that the reason I enjoy the testing is because sometimes I am surprised by the result. Whereby I might do a test result expecting it to be high, and then it's not there. And then I go, okay, so And this then helps me to make sure that I'm not barking up the wrong tree and going down a pathway that I shouldn't be. That I might then go off the back of that test, okay, I'm going to give you really high dose SAMe, and then the patient might come back to me in 2 months and be like, nah, I'm not really feeling any better. And if I had that result, I might know, well, I wouldn't have even gone down the path of giving them SAMe, but I would know then concretely, like, okay, this isn't the right path for you, and that's not going to help you, particularly mental health wise, in your journey to feeling better.
Are diet changes always required to treat and manage the high histamine?
You can absolutely go on a low histamine diet. So I have a wonderful handout that I give my clients because there's a few things within histamine. There's just strictly high histamine foods, but then there's also, as you would know, histamine releasing foods. So they promote the release of more histamine. So yes, going on a low histamine diet can be extremely helpful for people. But for me, I'm always wanting to understand, well, why can't you tolerate histamines in the first place? And so yes, you can go on a temporary low histamine diet, and it can be helpful for a myriad of things, eczema is one, all the congestion and sinuses, absolutely. The mental health side of things, absolutely. And you can manage your symptoms that way without a doubt. And you don't need a blood test to do that if you feel better doing that. And particularly if you are in a position where, you can't afford to go and see a naturopath, you can't afford the testing, you can do a trial of doing a low histamine diet and see if that improves your symptoms, because people with SIBO often have issues with histamine intolerance anyway. And oftentimes a low histamine diet is very helpful too.
And some of those foods that are high histamine or histamine releasing foods, I mean, when you say red wine and cheese, and it sort of feels like it makes sense that those foods might make you feel a bit less than after having lots of it. But avocados, and so there are certain foods there that are quite surprising and might seem to be, well, they're health promoting foods.
Absolutely. Bananas is one. As I said, kiwi fruit, papaya, shellfish, all of those sorts of things are, very much a high histamine food. And oftentimes when you take out those foods for a lot of people, all their congestion goes away, all of their symptoms go away. And then you kind of go, okay, well, you've got some sort of histamine-based related issue going on.
And so some of these foods are quite health promoting. Do you need to be eating this way for the rest of your life?
That's the reason I like the testing, particularly if there is a gut related sort of issue, and also hormones as well. If you can, histamine, as I said at the start of the chat, is like a bucket, right? So if you can get you to the point where, you're filling your bucket up slowly, and you're also being able to excrete it better, then you are able to enjoy those foods as well. But again, it's about keeping that bucket from overfilling to that point where you then don't get a reaction. So as I said, some people then can have a banana smoothie, but then the next they might have avocado, and they can kind of just manage it that way. And then they might find if they are going to have a night, out on the wine and the cheese and the chocolate that day, maybe just being mindful of the bananas and the avocados that day. So they're keeping their bucket from overflowing, but then also working on the things that can obviously prevent that bucket from clearing quickly or filling their bucket up too quickly, that being hormone related and SIBO too.
I love flexibility. Whenever we're talking about diet changes, I think it's so important, especially in this world where we're talking about women who might have that tendency towards perfectionism, anxiety. There's often a relationship with food that we need to consider in that. And so the idea that it's not all or nothing, and it's not never again can you have these things, and you can work with this, just working with your body more mindfully. I love that.
Yes, no, I'm very flexible with my dietary, because, it's not fun to be super restrictive. You want to be able to go out and just have a pizza and just not have to think about the ramifications of that.
Exactly. And we know that dieting doesn't work in that sense. So it's not about being on a diet. I'm always so careful and mindful of this with my clients, but I'm always like, okay, we're going to make some food changes temporarily.
Yes.
But then we're going to get you to a place where you can enjoy things more easily. And so it's just that journey. And I think it's the way that you view it and work with it that makes it can be night or day, for people as well. Beautiful.
Absolutely.
Okay. What about alcohol in general? Is it just wine?
Wine is the bigger one, but yes, alcohol, unfortunately, it will trigger off a histamine reaction. However, in saying that, if you're going to have any alcohol, it would be more of like a vodka, tequila-y sort of basing, like a white sort of spirit-based alcohol is probably your best bet if you are going to go and drink.
get straight on the tequila shots, everyone.
I'm not promoting alcohol drinking, but if someone does want to have something to drink, a vodka, lime, and soda or something is kind of usually the one that's usually the best for people.
Yeah, understood. Is there any difference with gin there? Just thinking about the like clear spirits.
You know what? I've never drunk gin, so I just don't even know. What's gin? What's the base of gin? Because but like it's normally like a wheat based with vodka.
Oh, good question. I know. I think is vodka potatoes? Or
Vodka can be potato. So vodka's normally barley, I think, but you can get potato based vodka.
There's going to be someone listening who loves gin and is
Yes.
just like yelling out right now, like, gin's this. I don't know what gin is actually, but
I don't know.
But it'll depend what it's made from.
Yes, that's what I'm thinking. So potentially gin might be okay as well for the gin lovers. Maybe just Google it for us.
Those that love a G&T. I quite enjoy a G&T from time to time on occasion.
Love it.
Okay, so we're looking at maybe there's some diet changes in the short term, particularly, and then just being mindful of those trigger foods going forward while we build the system up and look at what those underlying causes might be. So it could be estrogen and balancing out those hormones. It could be looking at the SIBO, which is a whole journey in itself. This is not quick fix territory, by the way, people. We're talking months of looking after your body and possibly looking at a methylation issue too.
Potentially, yeah, you've summed it up really well. It's really, initially trying to find out those kind of drivers. You can get temporary relief by doing the dietary sort of suggestions and then maybe adding in some additional support to help clear the histamine. But really for me, I like to understand why you actually have these issues in the first place, because I think if you can get to that, then you are going to be able to have more freedom with your diet moving forward.
Do antihistamine medications play into this at all? Do you use them as a tool? Could they be used as in, you know, oh, I feel better when I take an antihistamine, as another way to kind of, I'm talking like shortcuts here, but just see if you feel better?
Totally. I love actually getting to understand what people do really well on in terms of medication. I do it for skin with a pill, like what pills actually worked for your skin, because it can be super insightful to understand maybe the underlying hormonal drivers that are sort of driving that skin. And the same with antihistamines. Yes, I don't recommend them in terms of a treatment, but absolutely, I always go over their medication history. Sometimes I'll even ask, did that antihistamine help you sleep? Because a lot of times people will take an antihistamine, and if it helps them sleep, I'm like, it's probably a histamine problem.
Wow, that's such a great little nugget there.
Yeah. Yes. So yeah, if you get better sleep with having an antihistamine, or they use it for a sleep tablet instead of using the traditional sleeping tablets that are out on the market, then that can often point to it being a histamine related problem. And I know a lot of people with high histamine issues do have trouble sleeping, or at least getting to sleep at nighttime.
So that's another common symptom we can add to the list too.
Yes.
Beautiful. Okay. Is there a particular kind of sleep disturbance, or is it just all the sleep disturbance? Like, you know, sometimes it's like waking early, or it might be that difficulty getting to sleep.
Usually find it's difficulty getting to sleep. It's like that brain needs to like shut off and wind down. And because that histamine is revving up your brain so much, and you haven't got that GABA in either to help soothe and relax that brain, it's typically getting to sleep is I found the most kind of common presenting symptom with histamine.
Wow. Oh my gosh. So fascinating, Megan, to dive into it and to like, you know, take all of that into this context. If you had to sum up anything in the realm, now I'm throwing you on the spot here, but anything else in the realm of like things that you wish more women maybe knew about their bodies or about their hormones, is there anything in particular that you're just like, I wish I could scream this from the rooftops? Is it about the pill? Is it about how our cycles work?
I would love to everyone know that the pill does not regulate your period. I feel like I bang my head against a brick wall sometimes, and I feel like I talk about it too much as well. But then I'll have women come to me and they'll be like, yep, so I went on the pill to regulate my period. And then I have to be like, okay, let's have a conversation around that first, you know, and then I have to really unpack that with a lot of women, because it's just such a throwaway comment that they hear, like, oh, we'll put you on the pill to regulate your period, all good. And you're like, we need to take that back a few steps. I'm like, it's not regulating anything. it's shutting off everything. There is no regulation of the hormone because you're not even going to have a period, so it's not regulating a period because that period doesn't exist. Period can only happen after actually ovulating, and you're not ovulating on the pill. Sorry. And then
no, these are my pet peeves too. Like, I'm just like, yeah, we do need the women knowing this.
Yes,
men should know this about women's bodies too.
Totally. Yes. That's my biggest pet peeve is that, I even heard it the other day. I was at the hairdressers and there was a man sitting next to me who's getting his hair done. And I think he said, he likened basically being on the pill to the same thing as being pregnant. And I just wanted to start having this big, deep, open conversation about how that is not the exact same. But yeah, I think there is such a disregard and sort of very much a lack of education on it. I think it is so, we just kind of think it's like, oh, whatever, go on the pill. It's not really going to do anything bad. It just make everything better. Don't worry about it. There's just such a we don't truly realize the significant impact it has on our bodies until a decade later when you're like, oh, I kind of want to get pregnant now, or I just want to come out and just enjoy my periods, because we're at that space where you have that, capacity to kind of learn about your periods and your cycles. And then you get off it and then you have no idea about your body at that point because it's just been managed for so long through those bleeds. And then you find out all these other symptoms that you have because you've been on the pill for a decade. A lot of SIBO I see is literally just from being on the pill for a decade, because that creates SIBO. That's, I think, why I see so much SIBO now. And because of the women I see is because they've been on the pills, then they've been on Accutane, and then they've been on all these drugs that cause SIBO.
And of course, it's not every woman that's going to get SIBO from taking the pill, but yeah, it definitely does create changes to the microbiome. I've definitely had cases where that's been the only thing we can kind of pinpoint the gut symptoms to.
Absolutely.
But it's amazing how it can affect women. I was very lucky, my experience with the pill. The major impact I noticed was the change to my libido when I was taking it. And then when I wasn't taking it, I was like, oh my God, actually, it's so different.
But I don't want to have sex. And then, oh, I do want to have sex.
Yeah, actually, I'm alive, which I suppose is pretty significant. It's funny how I just wrote that off as not an important thing, because it is. But I just think, honestly, one of my greatest joys living in a woman's body is my cycle and enjoying it and flowing with it and knowing what's happening and knowing how it all changes. And I just think it's such a shame that we don't treat that as sacred as it is in society. And we just want to shut it down and turn it off and set and forget for later because it's too much to handle. It's like, what are you talking about? This is such a beautiful thing about being a woman.
Yes, I think oftentimes people, I don't think we give enough people credit for the ability to learn these things. Yes, it can be daunting, but I just liken it to starting a new job. It feels really daunting at the start, like any new job does. But I think once you get into it and you start learning about it and you start to just pull the little pieces of information together, you don't need to learn everything all in one go. You can just slowly start to pick up new signs and symptoms and be just noting them down. Okay, cool. Oh yeah, actually I do get really wet, slippery mucus around these kind of days in my cycle. Okay, yeah, I am starting to feel a bit headachy in those 2 to 3 days leading into my bleed, and you can start to notice those changes around your cycle as well, and then get support as well if you need to, particularly if those symptoms are bothering you.
Absolutely. And I think it's a beautiful step forward for building that more loving relationship with yourself and your body, is learning about your cycle, learning about what it all means. Because why not? It's fascinating. It is truly fascinating to get to know yourself in that way.
It is. And being okay that you don't feel the same every day. I know today I'm in my luteal phase, so my brain does feel a little bit mushy today, but I'm aware of it as well. And so I feel I don't then, bash myself down and go, oh, why am I not feeling okay today? Why am I not on the top of my game? Well, it's just I'm in my luteal phase, and that's kind of normal.
That's exactly one of the things that I love to share with people too. And I found myself is that sense of you give yourself permission at that time to slow down. It's like, oh, I don't have to be on my A game this week. I will be in next week. It's all good.
Yeah, exactly.
And trusting the flow, the ebb and the flow of your energy and your productivity and all those things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, Megan, thank you so much for being here. I've really enjoyed this chat. 2 more questions before we go. The first one is, with your personal experience with anxiety, of course, there's been a deeper, exploration with histamine and hormones and all those other things that went on for you and how the pill affected your body. But when you were dealing with anxiety, or when it can still come up for you sometimes, what do you find to be useful for you? Do you have any kind of everyone wants a trick, everyone wants a tip.
Yes.
Is it meditation for you? Is it a mantra that you like to tell yourself that really helps?
I have found what has been most helpful for me over the years is staring it in the face. And I say this, I know this sounds so silly, but I would this is when I was much younger. I don't do this now, but when I was much younger, like 24, I would literally stare myself in the mirror and be like, bring it on. And I would be like, because that's all it really has over you is control, and it can't kill you, although you do think it's going to kill you in the time, but it's not going to hurt you. And the more I became stronger than that anxiety, that was very powerful for me, and just having that, strength over it. And if I do have it now, I'm very aware of it now. And if I am feeling a little bit racy in my thoughts, I will often disconnect from my phone and I won't be on Instagram and I won't be scrolling, because I find that will really rev me up and release my anxiety more for me. And if I feel it coming out in at night, that's usually when I'll feel my anxiety, is at nighttime when I'm trying to go to bed. And I allow that feeling now just to wash over my body. I don't fight it. I don't let it. I just let it come and go. And I just try and sit down really deep in it, and I will just let it come, and then it just goes, and then I wake up and I'm fine.
Boom, sister. You've nailed it. The process. I love it. And where can we find you, Megan? Those who are listening, they're like, this chick is awesome. She's got so much up her sleeve. Where can we find you?
Thank you. If you would love to find me, I am, my Instagram handle is the Biomedical Naturopath.
Beautiful. Well, we'll make sure we tag that we have your tag. Is that what we say? The handle.
The handle. Is it Instagram handle?
We're going to pop that in the show notes so everyone can find you nice and easily. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been wonderful. I really enjoy talking about this stuff, so thank you.
If you're ready for the deep dive into this work to master your anxious mind, I invite you to join the Anxiety Reset program. Over 90 days, I'll be guiding you on how to build your mental resilience, reprogram those limiting beliefs that keep you stuck in self-doubt, heal your gut, balance your hormones, nourish your mind, body, and soul. Using a combined approach of naturopathy, nutrition, hypnotherapy, and live group coaching with me, you'll feel supported and motivated to show up for yourself consistently, day after day. And this is how you will experience extraordinary results. You can master your anxious mind. The best time to begin is right now. Let's do it together. You'll find the link to learn more in the show notes. Thank you for listening. We have reached the end of this episode. If you enjoy this podcast and you find it helpful, I would really appreciate it if you would hit subscribe or share this episode on your Instagram stories, and make sure you tag @Georgie the Naturopath. But that is all for today. Please be kind to yourselves. Know that you are enough and you are exactly where you need to be.